where they live and their community is so important, especially to teachers like me who want to make them feel included, feel appreciated, teach them some new things, So WNT is, like I said, a pioneer in that. They touch base with the leaders in various school districts throughout Long Island. First thing I did was to reach out to people who were more knowledgeable, people who were already in the field. You actually had a guest on that I reached out to all the way 9 years ago when I started.
Really?
Don Global.
Don, yeah.
Yeah, I reached out to him. Yeah, he is. I reached out to him through emails on a listserv that I found him on.
You are listening to the Global CTE Podcast with your host, Sylvester Chisom.
Welcome, my friends, to another episode of the Global CTE Podcast. I am your host, Sylvester Chisom. This is the place where we interview the best, the brightest, the movers, the shakers, and the innovators. Today is no different. I have my friend, Dr. Sequoyah Wharton here. Now, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Wharton. He is an award-winning educator, media literacy advocate, and digital storytelling innovator. He teaches digital filmmaking, broadcast journalism, and visual arts in New York City, and serves as an adjunct professor at several universities where he focuses on adolescent art education and creative media pedagogy. Dr. Wharton is the executive director of the Empowering Global Educators Foundation. He's a PBS Student Reporting Labs teacher ambassador. And if that's not enough, he's a 2026 Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellow who's placed on Capitol Hill. His work blends creativity, equity, and global citizenship, empowering students to use storytelling as a tool for social impact. Dr. Wharton, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Definitely an honor to be here with you. I've watched your episodes. I've seen some of the people that you've, had on your show. It's really amazing that you're really touching base with all these people that are so influential in education.
Thanks, man. Thanks. And I'm excited to add you to the family. Welcome to the Global CTE Podcast family. Man, I was super, your background, like coming from blue collar workforce to leading up to this point. Now you're an Albert Einstein fellow. Like, man, you're doing so much. So your depth of knowledge and the global work you're doing, I really was excited. I'm like, this is a perfect fit. I have to have you on the show. Before we go too deep into all of that, Dr. Wharton, what's the origin story, man? How do you get here?
Well, oh man. It's always tough to talk about yourself, so I have to put it through my mother's lens, my mom was the one who always kind of guided my creativity and kind of always put me out there and to explore new things, but I'm not going to travel too far back into that story, but at the same time, even in high school, I wanted to be involved in the arts. I never knew how. I didn't really ever have guidance on how to be involved in the arts. The arts was something that you did on your free time. You might have been good at, but you never were told that you could get a job in doing something with the arts. And I was one of those kids that was talented drawing, painting, sculpting, but I always thought, maybe I can't get a job in the arts. So I went into I went into community college for a couple of years outside of high school, and then went right into blue collar labor, whether it be manual labor, the labor union, 731, driving tractor trailers, driving trucks, But at the same time, I always wanted to kind of go back into, possibly being a teacher, possibly being an artist, and that's something that always weighed heavy on my mind as I worked as a young man. And, but life events happen. I had lost a really close friend of mine. He was like a brother to me, left behind his very young son. And at that time, I kind of was at the crossroads where I really wanted to do something different. And that was kind of like that defining moment when I stopped doing what I was doing as far as blue collar labor, and kind of quit and went to school and ended up going to studying abroad for a little while in London, coming back and having no job. and my boss, fortunately, was a great boss that I had left the job that I was at and told me to come back and drive trucks for a little while. And as I was driving trucks and delivering plumbing supplies, I was going to school full time at night, through my bachelor's, through my master's, and started teaching and went to my doctorate eventually. You know,
I appreciate the perseverance in that story and like you pushing to like, you saw something different for yourself, like the next version of yourself. I'm curious. You mentioned your mother, so I'm actually going to push you on that. What's the best piece of advice that your mother gave you that you still probably use to this day that helps guide you?
You know, it's not like I remember words as advice. She would just she would actually encourage me to do things that I came up with. She was never, I don't know, she never made me feel bad for failure or made me feel like I failed, which I think is so important, you know, because I was a creative kid and I wanted to try so many things, and she just encouraged me to do it. She never kind of held me back from doing anything. She knew I was trying to be productive in a positive way, whether it was trying to make money or trying to learn new things. And that was something that has always stuck with me. And I'm very grateful for that. You know, failure shouldn't be looked at as something that defining moment for you. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a learning moment. It's all part of the process. Even in my own education, as I teach, you know, in my classroom, I always push the process and not the product. Mm-hmm. You know, you kind of hear that a lot now. I think people finally catching on to that, but it is the truth. You know, it's all about that process. You know, we're here for such a short time on this earth, and it's all about really appreciating the moment. Not, you know, like I said, not finishing that goal isn't the goal isn't the most important part. It's the
journey. The process, the journey. I appreciate you saying that, especially working with our students, man, like trying to pass that. It's great when the educators, the leaders have that perspective. It makes it a lot easier to pass that down to, you know, to the students in the classroom. I want to talk a little bit about that. The school environment you work in. Can you share a little more about like, you know, what's the school like, you know, some demographics, you know, anything that may be interesting to the student population you work with?
Yeah, you know, the school I work with, I work in the largest suburban school district in New York. It's a 90% Latino, 8% Black, but it's a tremendous school district. Almost over 18,000 students in the district. It's a tremendous district. Oh, wow. But it's a diverse, multilingual, extremely bright students that are hardworking, smart. Like I said, they want to be part of different activities, and they want to, you know, be part of AP classes and music and the arts. At the high school I teach at, a tremendous art program with a lot of experienced teachers there that guide them through that creativity. Mm-hmm. Our space is kind of centered in the middle of the school. Mm-hmm. And it's nice because our school is so long. It feels like it's like a mile long, you know, but our kids kind of migrate from end to end into the middle where we kind of focus. And it's nice. You know, I personally, in my classroom, you know, I hear the stresses of my students about, you know, teaching to the test and, you know, all these things they got going on, you know, and I like to be able to kind of take that stress away from them, because they're not being taught to the test. I'm like, they might be taught to the project or to finish the project, but I'm not, like I just told you before, I'm not worried about the project necessarily getting finished, although I would like to hope to submit it to some sort of mentor or not, you know. But yeah, no, it's a great school.
Yeah, in alignment that what you just said, let's go to your classroom. How are you leveraging digital storytelling and the student voice so that maybe some of those frustrations or pains they're able to actually get out and share in their own voices and perspectives, which may be, you know, a little more non-traditional than the other classes that they're taking?
Yeah, you know, in the beginning of the year, it's always a bit of a challenge. You know, high school students are a bit shy at first, you know, and they got to kind of warm up to both their teacher and their classmates, you know. Additionally, you know, a lot of my students are English language learners. So, you know, English isn't their first language. So speaking on camera in English is a bit of a challenge. But first step, you know, in the beginning of the year is to be a bit self-deprecating and telling them that, you know, I still don't know it all. And you might ask me questions. And I'm like, well, let's find that out together, you know. And that's some of the things that I think is comforting to a student, where they can relate with you, you know, as opposed to maybe a math class where maybe, you know, it's has to be one way, you know, you're you're going to solve an algebra problem the same way, but they don't have to complete assignment the same way. I mean, I might have 19 to 30 students in my media classroom, and they all can complete the assignment in individual ways. My first assignment I give is a little bit of an introduction to themselves.
Okay.
And I let them complete it any way they want. This year, so since I'm not in the classroom, I'm not sure how that would have played out since they're.
Hold on one second. So for our audience, why weren't you in the classroom? What are you doing?
Yeah. So, this year as an Albert Einstein fellow.
So I'm sorry. Say it again. Yeah, you've been very humble here, man.
Yeah. So I'm one of 15 educators chosen from around the nation to be an Albert Einstein fellow. I feel very fortunate to be around these educators. They're typically STEM educators, math, science, typically. I'm not necessarily a STEM educator. I mean, I do use technology in my classroom, but I fit very comfortably with them because of how I incorporate the research into my students' stories, how they have to look that information up through technology, through the sciences, through math, etc. So, yeah.
No, that's cool. I just had to, you're like, yeah, I'm not in the classroom right now. Let's just touch on that. We'll come back to that later. But I'm curious, what's some of the most interesting, give me a good story on a student. You don't have to say their name if you don't need to, but like who did something interesting with that first assignment that like kind of took you somewhere different.
Yeah, so some of my students that are very interested, I'll go to that first, who are very interested to be in the class, they watch different documentaries or they watch different shows that interest them, even some of my 10th graders like watching anime and they incorporate that into their stories or something, I think of some students that, create these very fictitious storylines, and to introduce themselves. And I think they love that I don't mind them bringing their creativity and something that I might not necessarily teach throughout the year, how they can incorporate it into their stories, and that allows them to warm up, throughout the year, that there's no restrictions, very little restrictions. There's some restrictions, obviously, but yeah, they just get to be open to be themselves, they can team up with classmates if they feel comfortable, or they can do it by themselves. It's just a way to get to see who does what, who's the mover and shaker in the class, who's going to help me out, Within the first week, I already know what student I can call on to, hey, let's set up the cameras, let's do this project a certain way. That's always the fun part, just creating a community. When you walk into my classroom, it's like no other classroom, so that's the best part.
No, that's cool. I'm sure it's a bright spot in the school and in the school district, no doubt. With that being said, like, media and how important that is. I appreciate, because of your class, students get a chance to express their creativity. You encourage the creativity, which is one of the top, durable skills that's needed, for future success. But as it relates to media literacy, talk to me about that as a critical skill for today's students, how it connects to CTE a little bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, media literacy is first and foremost so important. Being media literate takes on multi-dimensions, understanding the information that is being told to you, who is being told to, who is your audience. These are some of the fundamental things that you think of being media literate. If you look into politics, for instance, who is passing on that information? I'm not going to go into politics, but who's passing on that information and what are you getting from that content? And these are some of the things that students need to learn and understand. Parts of good journalism involve, this is a big thing, but parts of rudimentary journalism involves walking a tightrope in the middle, and having, not invoking your opinion on it, right? So, getting the story from who you're interviewing is important. But there's a lot of disinformation out there. And that's something that, you have to teach students, and, communication or through media communications is the way to do it,
What are some of the ways, some other ways you're like helping students build that foundational skill of communication in different areas?
So I'm always looking for ways to improve my teaching method, right? Mm-hmm. So that always your question makes me think of when I first started teaching media. I'm an art teacher, but I was asked to teach media, and I was like, oh man, like I was tasked with a big task, and the first thing I did was to reach out to people who were more knowledgeable, people who were already in the field. You actually had a guest on that I reached out to all the way 9 years ago when I started. Really? With Don Goebel.
Don, so,
yeah. I reached out to him. Yeah, he is. I reached out to him through email on a listserv that I found him on. And I don't know how I found him initially. I mean, because it wasn't from the listserv, but I had seen him out there, and I emailed him, and that man emailed me back so quick. So what? This man don't even know me, And that was a really nice connection that I made with him, and he kind of gave me some pointers. I asked some questions, gave me some pointers. Additionally, I looked for other resources, as you mentioned in my bio. Through PBS. These are people who are living and breathing media and story and discussion and communications. And, that is, they actually helped me attain my CTE certificate through that, to teach that, what's great about media in general is the fact that for a high school student, media fits into both the academic world and the CTE, right? It's you could be part of a, camera crew where you're part of a union, right? Or you can be into academia where I am, and being able to explain and discuss pedagogy and, the dynamics of where communication has come from and where it's evolved, or where it's evolving to. So
that's powerful how you frame that. I'm curious with PBS, because I know you do a lot of work with them. They're great storytellers there, great digital storytellers. What's probably one of the biggest things you learned from your time working with PBS around storytelling?
It's a constant learning practice. I don't know if it's necessarily learning something like kind of new, but it's just reinforcing community. They continually reinforce engaging, reaching out to community and all different types of people, all different walks of life. And they constantly reinforce that. They want to hear from everybody and anyone to discuss various topics from easy topics to very difficult topics, and convey that message so everybody can understand it or want to look into it more. They've been so supportive to my students over the years, and to me. It's been a blessing to be a part of. I mean, I'm actually, since I'm in DC, I've PBS Student Reporting Labs is based in DC at the WIDA location. Yeah, so I'm pretty close by. I hope to do some work with them in the near future while I'm here, which would be great if I could support them somehow. Additionally, I'm also part of the ETSC committee, which is the Electronic Telecommunications Service Committee through WNET, where I'm the vice chair, and I get to contribute to initiatives to support our students on Long Island, which is really wonderful. And that was part of, yeah.
And say more about that. What does that look like? How do you support the students?
So I mean, one program that UNET PBS has been working on is reaching out to our Latino community, seeing if there's bilingual lessons to be taught and how we can communicate with our Latino community, which is great because, like I said, my school is primarily Latino, and reaching out and touching those students in every way and connecting them to where they live in their community is so important, especially to teachers like me who want to make them feel included.
Yes.
Make them feel appreciated and teach them some new things, So WNET is, like I said, a pioneer in that. They touch base with the leaders in various school districts throughout Long Island. And it's just, like I said, they're doing that outside work, that that maybe a school district can't do by themselves, you know?
Yeah, that's why I asked you, because I was curious. You're like, as we keep talking and as I was doing my research, I knew this, but like, you're like a master of partnerships, of like collaboration, you know, like, and not trying to hold it all and thinking Dr. Wharton has to come up with everything. You have to have it all, but leveraging partnerships. Talk to me about your approach with that, because I mean, you're touching everything from, you know, really cross-sector collaboration, from PBS to the school district, universities, to the work you're doing now even.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as you know, as a teacher, you know, you're always learning and always trying to communicate, you know. I inevitably feel like I don't know anything, you know. And so, you know, like, you know, sometimes I might know a little something, but I always feel like, man, I don't know anything about this, you know. And I just want to research it, you know, and I want to look it up and ask the experts, you know, and there's only so much you can attain and remember from reading something. You know, it's really touching base with people who experience it. You know, to remember something, I always remember a professor of mine, Patrick Avioli from University. He always said, you know, what creates a memory, and that's when an emotion is evoked, you know, and you know. It's the truth, you know. If you drop like say you dropped your favorite coffee mug in the morning, man, like, you know, I'll never do that again, you know. You know, and it evokes such an emotion of how it happened. If you were careless at the moment, maybe you're rushing around, you know, I don't know, whatever it is, you know, but you will remember that forever, you know, because it evoked an emotion, you know. So me personally, reaching out to people, trying to touch base with them, how I kind of perceive, you know, I like stepping into spaces where I'm not, quote unquote, supposed to be. Not necessarily that I'm not supposed to be there, but I'm not expected to be there. Mm-hmm. You know, like I said, being an Einstein fellow, you know, like I said, I belong in this space, and I know I belong in this space, but how I belong in there is up to me to show people how I'm there, and how I want to support what they do through what I know and what I've attained over time. You know, mm-hmm. Like I said, I'm a creative thought person. You know, I think on my feet. You know, like, you know, if I don't know, I'm going to figure out how to know.
Yeah, that's. I wanted to ask you, since you kind of have taken us there, like, what really inspired you to pursue that Albert Einstein Fellowship, and I'm curious how your global education work connects with the fellowship's mission.
Yeah. You know, I think the opportunity to work in different federal agencies and to, like I said, you actually interview for different federal agencies, and the one I was chosen for to be on Capitol Hill, I think is a great opportunity because I get to speak to constituents, I get to speak to members, I get to speak to different people. Hey, that's what a communications teacher does, right? You know, and these are people that not the everyday public gets to talk to, you know, and I want to be able to utilize this opportunity to continue to make those connections for my students. And the biggest thing for me is to advocate for them, you know, but I also think on a bit of a grander scale, you know, I love to travel. I love to communicate with people outside of the immediate U.S., you know, on my free time, you know, during summers, I travel. I've been last year, or actually, last year, 2 years ago now, but I was in Indonesia for the summer. Oh, and wow. Yeah, and my intention was to not only be on vacation, but to write and to travel there again and to see about their educational system and how they do it. You know, because I was on a tour, and I was on Ghana's village. It's this village up on a mountain. And this little girl, she was about 8 or 9 years old, knew English so well. And she was touring around this little group and explaining, you know, and it was the craziest thing. And I remember asking her, I said, how did you learn English so well? And she's like, yes. I'm like, yes. I'm like, you have a teacher who teaches you English, you know? Mm-hmm. She's like, no. I'm like, I don't know. Tell me. And she's at Google. What?
Okay.
I'm like, what? Okay. You know, I'm like,
yeah, I thought you were going to say like cartoons or something.
Oh man, yeah. Google. She looked up words, she repeated them, and she learned it. But It's amazing. Like but why? So here's the thing, what is the biggest market in Indonesia? Just off the top of your head, I don't know, randomly. What do you think the biggest market?
The biggest market, like
what is their biggest,
export or something?
Not even necessarily a product, but what do you think is the biggest thing that brings in money?
Maybe in Indonesia, is it tourism?
It's tourism.
Okay.
Yeah. And a lot of their tourists come from Australia, not so much America, but from Australia and New Zealand. And they need to learn English so they can sell their goods, right? And they're not, and like I said, they're not necessarily learning it in school, and but they're learning it on their own, and through this, they're intelligent. They know that if I speak English better, I'm going to be able to sell my product. So it's just, oh man,
it's impressive.
It's very impressive.
An 8 or 9 year old girl eating the tour. That's crazy.
Oh my God, it was so cute too. And she's like walking us around. She's like, "This is my school." Oh man, it was crazy. It was, and then, like I said, her little friends, we met her friends, and the friends were, oh man, it was amazing, but these are the things that I enjoy. And so that brings me back to like global education and bringing in, bringing in that type of mindset into the classroom. And I think about, the US and how our bilingual education system is not really there. You only have to take it a few years depending on what state you're in, but I think we're definitely behind in that respect. And I think it's important. I mean, how else can you learn about a culture unless you speak their language? There are words that don't translate from culture to culture. There are phrases. There's place-based education. I mean, things don't translate the same way if you have to translate it into your own language. And me being someone who loves to communicate with people, I want to learn it the way they learned it. I want to understand they understand. They're not going to understand necessarily my immediate culture unless they understand the whole vibe of it. I want them to know. So
that's awesome. You and I are both aligned on the importance of global travel and seeing the world as your classroom. There's so many insights that you pick up when you're in different places. How are you trying to incorporate more of that into your work with students in in the classroom, like with that piece?
So when I was in London, I made some friends there, of course, and I've kept in touch with them, fortunately, through Facebook or like I said, or WhatsApp or whatever. And through that connection, I was asked 2 years ago to contribute to a book. One of my friends that I made there, she asked, would you want to contribute this chapter into a book with a bunch of authors about a subject, right? And it was about play-based education or so like we might think of it more project-based, but some people play-based. And it was for adult learners. And this really kind of really sparked my global, like, man, this is where I need to be all the time. I love this. This is a collaborative effort, not just so homegrown. It's all over the world. Like, I love that. And I wrote that chapter. It was published by Routledge. So there's a bunch of us authors in there.
That's awesome.
And then and now currently, I was going to contribute to another book. Long story short, the second editor of that book had something else to do. It couldn't be a part of this book. And they asked me if I would be an editor for it. So now I'm working on a book that's going to be published with Routledge called The Play Advantage, Global and Indigenous Perspectives on Play in Higher Education. And
hold on. So you gotta stop there. You gotta stop. Pause there. Okay. Give me some insights. What can you share, a lesson or something that someone will walk away from that book? Because that's such a powerful title.
Yeah. So, the power of play is important. So not just for children, because we know children, their playtime has been taken away, elementary education in the US, but play for an adult is also important. Not only play to learn, doing a project, and this is that opportunity to learn from indigenous cultures and how they incorporate that and how they've never escaped that playful message to learn, where they're learning by oral traditions, like by speaking about it, not just writing about it. You go to various indigenous cultures. It's all through storyline. It's all through conversation. It's all through the doing and the making. It's about keeping traditional cultures alive. And these are some of the things that all indigenous cultures from around the world do. And I feel the 21st century classroom, where we've relied on technology and westernized vision, has taken away from our memory bank. Like, we don't have to remember anything anymore, because it's, we can look it up and then, turn off the computer and not remember it. Where if you're learning with your hands and you're learning through having to tell a story and talk about it and retain that information, that it's keeps you alive. Yeah, it's just different. There's so many good stories that are going to be part of this book from authors from around the world, like Brazil, from Japan, Cameroon, from New Zealand, Dubai, like, there's so many different ways to look at it. It's going to be a really good collaboration of authors from around the world.
Man, that sounds dope. When are you all thinking about having that done? By the end of the year, next year?
Yeah, this year, the timeline, we have to complete the manuscript by November, and probably by, mid next year, if Routledge publishes some books around that time. So yeah, probably mid next year come out.
We should figure out, I think, as you're saying that, man, that would be, if once you all have that done and you are ready to start promoting it, that would be cool if we could find time to bring all those people together in some type of conversation or workshop like that. I would love to explore how I can help you all get that message out, because that's such a unique conversation that would probably, I know, is going to garner deep insight. When you're talking about places where preservation of culture is a high priority to the people, and how, like you're saying, how we pass that down in that learning tradition, that would be I'm sure some great insights are going to come out of that.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. Like I said, it's important. I come from a mixed background, and, I've always felt connected to all different cultures and races. I'm not just on one side, like I'm all about it. Bring me to my, any type of culture friends. I'm all about their tradition. I want to learn it. I want to soak it up. Give me the food. Give me whatever I got to do. Like I love being a part of it. No, that's I'm gonna do this. All right, that's
we're the same in that, and I think that like that comes from when you travel. That's one of the maybe like the macro level takeaways, is that like you're more open-minded to experiencing diverse cultures. And I think that even helps, like, especially taking that back to our students, like the stuff we do with Show Me the World, it helps for our students to be able to interact with other people from other places and understand, like, they eat something different. They, maybe they're fasting during this particular time, or they celebrate their new year at this time, or they wear their hair in this certain tradition or certain type of jewelry or religion or fabrics, like, or dance, like all these things that are our cultural expressions that help us find our way to that place of inclusion, Yeah. I want to go.
Yeah, it's just so meaningful to do that. Like, I love that. Like, there's nothing better than like I said, learning about that from somebody. It's funny, actually, even learning that from maybe the same culture from people in different places. So maybe you're meeting someone who's Muslim and they've grown up in America, as opposed to someone who's Muslim who grew up in a different country. And those traditions even change a bit, and there's a little bit of variance in how they celebrate different things. And even that is so interesting to me. Like I love the place-based education too. I love the little facets, I don't know, man, that all interesting.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I'm curious, going back to the Einstein Fellowship, I would ask you, like what do you hope to work on during the fellowship that might help educators bring more global perspectives and CTE opportunities into their schools?
Yeah, well, I definitely hope to learn about policy and how that policy can be introduced. I personally would love to see education a better opportunity for not for our students to maybe learn language at an earlier part of their lives and carry it throughout, maybe through high school, K to 12, or even open up ways for educators like myself personally. I understand a lot of Spanish, but I am so nervous to speak it, give me more of an opportunity to be able to become comfortable with it. You know what I mean? My students will talk crap about me behind my back, in a fun way. And I understand what they're saying. They're like, oh, you heard me? but it's, I love that, and I every time I've stayed in another country, I always try to learn the language as best as I can, and make mistakes, but, it's still uncomfortable, obviously, but like I said, I would love to learn more about policy and introducing different bills, there's so many different things. And like I said, just, maybe getting in touch with different embassies, who knows,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I want to ask you one more question before I ask my final one, because I think what you're doing is innovative. Like, you go from classroom educator, you are aware of this Einstein fellowship opportunity that's super elite from, it's only 15, right? You said 15 people from across the country out of all the educators that are selected, but you have to leave your school, your hometown, and go to another. You're there for a year, right? Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
For a year.
11 months. Yeah. 11 months. Yep.
Speak to someone who may be listening, who's like, I think I want to apply for this thing or this opportunity or this fellowship, but maybe nervous about I don't want to leave my space, to be maybe afraid of change that may help you grow as an individual. I'm just curious if you could speak to that level of you're doing professional development at the highest level with what you're doing here.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. It is quite the lift, everybody's situation is different, people, so many people have families, husband, wife, kids, various other obligations that they have to attend. But, all of us that are currently here and fellows before us, have all made that sacrifice, knowing that it's an opportunity to be somewhere where it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. And you really have to put that into perspective, for your own professional growth, for the betterment of our students, for, that networking opportunity. I mean, the short answer is, life is really short. Do you want to miss out on this? That's the real true life answer right there. What else are you doing? Make this work. It's just being optimistic as best as you can. Life is so easy to kind of get into that rut, and part of that optimism is being somewhere new, trying something different. I think this program really does a great job with explaining to people that, this is that opportunity to do that, to meet people, to network, step outside your comfort zone, to grow. They've really done a great job of that.
Yeah, I think it's the way I'm taking that away, even personally from this conversation, the way you are fully living out a growth mindset of new opportunity. Let me go and see about it. Like you just said, what are you doing? Make this work. That's the sound bite. What are you doing? Make this work.
Yeah, seriously.
I want to, my last question, I ask this to everyone, man. What is your vision for the future of career and tech education?
So our world is changing so quickly, and it seems like it's in an accelerated pace. Like we think of the first thing of growth in our modern day society right now. On everybody's mind, I mean, everybody is AI, right? And everybody worries about AI taking away our jobs. But honestly, I feel it's an opportunity to create new jobs. I mean, that's just my thought. I go back to the printing press, right? The printing press was, oh my God, everybody's going to have all this knowledge and information, right? And here we are. And then the internet came. Oh my God, all these people had all this information, right? Well, guess what? We're still here. So let's figure out and maneuver how we're going to create these jobs, right? And there's one job there's a bunch of jobs that it's still going to take a long time to be taken away, and that's our CTE jobs. That's working with your hands, right? If I wasn't teaching next year, and I needed a job to make money, guess what? I'd go right back to driving trucks. I'd go right back to plumbing, right back to working with my hands, being diverse, being that chameleon, being able to do what you need to do to survive, having no problem doing the type of job you need to do to provide for yourself, your family, your loved ones. I mean, that's what it's about. I mean, you can't be in this life expected to do just one thing with your life the whole entire time you're here. If you're not willing to modify, and to adjust, and to grow, that is the biggest hindrance to your life. You have to be able to, like I said, be a chameleon, be able to move around, and that's what's great about CTE. I feel. I don't know. I still love working with my hands and doing things like, building. Well, I did demolition too. So taking things down too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the big reasons why I started this podcast, is because these are all very honorable careers and trades that should be respected also at the highest level, So I appreciate everything that you shared. Dr. Sequoyah Wharton, if people want to connect with you, they want to learn more about working with the Global Educators Foundation, or they want to bring you in for a speech or something like that, where should they go? Where do you want to point them to?
LinkedIn is always, I love that LinkedIn's great, because not only does it share your information, but it does tell a little bit of your story before someone contacts you, so they can see what you're up to, and then it is very business oriented. So LinkedIn is probably the best way. And so, of course, if they contact me, I can see a little bit about them too before we even connect,
I love it. And I'll make sure to share Dr. Wharton's his LinkedIn information in the show notes. Man, thanks again for joining me today. You dropped a lot of gems. I appreciate everything you're doing. Wish you much success with this new journey you're on in Capitol Hill with the Einstein Fellowship. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, don't be selfish. Share it with a friend or a colleague who needs to hear these gems, these innovations around having that growth mindset, media literacy, all the great things that were shared today. Until the next episode, remember, you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Global CTE Podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to be the first to know about future episodes.